This plenary session is going to focus on power partners. So my role in this plenary session is to pad out a little bit of time while people walk into the room, which you can see I am doing right now. As people come into the room and take their seats very quickly, we will then move into the main event, which is me introducing the host of this event. And I'm delighted to be able to hand over to Olivia Butterworth. First met Olivia when she was working at the Department of Health and NHS England. She's a big champion for community development, community participation. She's now escaped the embrace of the NHS and Department of Health and is living a much better and more fulfilled life because of it, I'm sure. But I'll leave it to Olivia to describe her journey. Welcome, Olivia.
I don't want to stand at the lectern, and these lights are really bright. Hi, who's from Bristol? Woo! Who's from Northern Ireland? No, there's other people here from Ireland. I know there is. I saw them arrive. They're here somewhere, Shane. I'll find them for you. So my name's Olivia Butterworth. I started my life as a youth and community worker. Well, I didn't. I did some other stuff before that. I did all of the usual shit jobs that we all do to get by. But my shit jobs included raising baby tigers and flying falcons, so that was kind of quite cool. Oh, that's better. I'm out of the light. So cruel. So as a youth and community worker, I worked in local communities. I worked in communities that I didn't live in. I was very much a visitor in those communities, and my job was to work and connect with local people and enable local people to do for themselves. It wasn't to do for them. And I took that then into the voluntary sector. I did quite a lot of business development stuff. I worked in the CVS network. And then by some very strange twist of fate, I ended up in the Department of Health. I don't know why. And I led their third sector funding and investment review back in 2007-8. So for those of you that have been playing this game for quite a long time, this was in the sort of the shift towards social enterprise. This was in the shift to thinking about grants differently. And it was a shift in government thinking. It was Labour at the time, to really thinking about community and how we really invest and build strong partnerships with the voluntary sector. What's changed since then? I'm not wholly sure. I think we talk an awful lot more about the voluntary and community sector. I think our statutory sector partners are much more aware that the voluntary sector exists. But I'm still not sure we have a partnership of equals. I think my time in NHS England, so I spent the last 10 years, which I have just escaped from, I am in therapy. I spent 10 years leading for NHS England nationally around the statutory duty to involve, which for most people in the NHS is just about them defining the questions, them defining what it is they want to talk to communities about, and then calling people hard to reach because they don't rock up to their Have Your Say event. They don't go out into communities to spend time in and with people to really listen with intention about what's going on for those communities, about what's happening, where are the other things that are in that community that contribute to health and well-being. So that was my mission in NHS England for 10 years. And that's really what I want to continue to do, because I genuinely believe that it's having conversations that matter and lead to action, but we only have those conversations if we learn how to listen to one another. And I think you're going to hear this afternoon from 3 power partners. They're not actually partners in a civil partnership type of way, I don't think yet, but maybe that's going to come later. From 3 partnerships that are trying to do that, bringing together of the statutory sector culture and way of working with a community sector culture and way of working. And I just made a comment to Shane, who you're going to hear from first, about you look around this room. I've spent 10 years in far too many NHS conferences, and this room is so joyful because the diversity and the colour in this room is not what you see when you gather NHS leadership together. When you gather the NHS leadership together, it's all a bit grey. It's a bit pale. So there's a huge amount of learning that the NHS and our statutory sector partners can take from the voluntary sector, from community organisations who genuinely are of their communities. And who better to know what's going on in communities than the people who live there and work there daily at neighbourhood level, which is very different to sitting in a policy role at national level or even ICB level, dare I say. So I'm not going to say very much more other than I'm really looking forward to sharing some questions. I do have some pre-prepared questions, so please do log into your app and start putting your questions in. So as you're listening, please listen with intention. Don't listen to answer questions or comment on what they're saying, but really listen to the heart and the meat of what they're saying. But think about your questions as well, and I'll try and pull them off the various devices I've been given to try and make sure we get to as many of those as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first power partnership, who are of this place, this beautiful city that we're in. So Shane Devlin is the Chief Exec of Bristol, North Somerset. Oh, I can't remember the acronym. There's far too many letters in that acronym. Shane's going to give us a bit of a global view, and then Charlie is going to jump in very much from a community anchor perspective about what this feels and looks like in the place that he's working in. So over to you guys.
Oh, I'll stand here and then I'll bring you in, Charlie, yeah? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And even though I am from Bristol, North Somerset, and South Gloss, BNSSG, the accent doesn't sound like it, so I recently moved over from Northern Ireland about 18 months ago. So if I can give a bit of an introduction in terms of where we're trying to build a partnership for health and social care of the population. I'm not going to go through what integrated care boards are. Assume that people know 42 across England trying to develop ways of improving population health and well-being, okay? But I came into post about 18 months ago, and the first thing I talked about, I think people thought I was slightly mad, was we have to hear the voices, okay? We have to hear the voices. Before we set off on a journey, we have to hear the voices. And there were three sets of voices. There were the voice of the population, the voice of NHS, and the voice of people who work in the system. Because we can't set off on a plan to try and build partnerships and deliver improvements unless we heard the voices. And we went on a big journey, funny enough, called Have Your Say, but we didn't stay in our offices. We went out to community groups, to mosques, to churches, to early years centres to try and hear what is it that you need from health and social care to try and think about our strategy. And it will be no surprise to any of you in this room because you will know exactly what the population want or need because you're working every day in that space. But surprise, surprise, the four things they said to pretty much every question, but the undertone was, what keeps you happy, healthy, and well? The four answers were relationships with families, communities we belong to, how we live our life, and then how we can get help from the health service. So if you start from that point, rather than start from an NHS England saying you've got to have integrated care boards, but start from the view that what keeps people happy, healthy, and well is a relationship with their families, the communities they belong to, how they live their lives, and then the NHS, we could start to think differently about the partnerships we want to put in place. So what we have created within Bristol, North Somerset, and South Gloss is the idea of 6 localities. So we've looked at the population of Bristol, North Somerset, and South Gloss and said, actually, roughly the same size, though slightly different. We'll have 6 localities. We've about a population of about 1.1 million people. And we have said to the localities, understand your population. What does your population need? And we've done that through population health management information, listening, talking, seeing what we commission. And each locality then is working with its local people. So quite clearly, Charlie will talk about the localities he's in the middle of. And those localities develop the services that are needed on the ground, rather than this big thing called NHSE, which is saying, go do X, Y, and Z. Now, we're only 18 months in, okay? So we're on a journey. But what's interesting is we've began to develop partnerships that looked at social prescribing, new community mental health models being delivered, looking at community navigators. And so we're really trying to say it's not the big beast of NHS, it's the localities working together to try to change the lives of the population. And that is, for someone who spent 27 years working in the health service, that's different. That's not the way the health service works normally, and we're on a learning journey. So what Charlie's going to walk you through is what's happening within one of the localities and the involvement that he has in North and West Bristol. So over to you, Charlie.
Thanks, Shane. Fantastic. Yeah, my name's Charlie. I'm from Bristol. Give me a wave if you went on the Southmead tour today. Oh, some good waves. Good to see you. So Southmead is part of the patch that I'm involved with in North and West Bristol, trying, as Shane said, to link up the voluntary sector with the integrated care system. It's just one of those localities, one of those patches. And I'm just going to share about my experience of working in that role over the last 3 years. So there are lots of reasons why this is really difficult work and quite frustrating sometimes. So the system, although it says it's integrated, it's not integrated. It's still a long way from investing in a proper kind of well-being and preventative approach. The system works, I'd say, generally in a condition-specific way rather than a person-centered way. The areas of focus are often more top-down than bottom-up. And currently, there's a lack of clarity around what the devolved decision-making is and the budgets. So that's the bad news. Sorry, Shane. That's quite a list, isn't it? To add on to that, probably the most difficult thing is there are a lot of meetings. I've clocked up, I reckon, about 700 hours of system meetings. That's a lot of meetings. But I'm not here to give you all the bad news. I want to give you 3 things, 3 reasons that I feel hopeful about staying in this game and being part of this work. So the first one is Tony. Sorry, Tony, not you. Tony was referred to us 5 years ago when he was 35. He had end-stage kidney disease, had stopped going to getting his dialysis treatment, so he was in a really serious place. He was also disconnected from his community, from his family, and he'd given up, really, when we met him. He'd been burnt by the system so much that when we started working with him, then linked him up to a volunteer, a resident, the resident went and knocked on his door 3 consecutive weeks before he answered the door. He so much needed somebody to build faith and trust with. And now he's had his kidney transplant. He does Tai Chi every week. He's linked back up to his mother and his brother. And for me, it's a story that shows how adult social care, hospital staff, the good old voluntary sector can work together. When we're able to work together effectively, then some of the magic can happen. Number 2 is that a well-being approach saves money. So that project that I just explained about that Tony's part of, University of West of England just done an evaluation on it to show that for every £1 invested in it, there's a £3.30 return on investment. And that's things like delaying or preventing participants going back into residential care or reducing adult social care's time. Now, my hope is that we continue to invest in that kind of work. And we're starting to see, as Shane said, that kind of conversation is starting to go in the right way. And the third thing is working with people like Shane and Neil, who's going to come up. We've got a long way to go, but actually I think there are people within the system that get this. And I think the biggest thing for me is having moved from what felt like before, like a them and us, to now it does feel like an us. We're having conversations and we're all around the table. And that's really important. So I know I've spoken to some of you this convention, and you're involved with ICBs, you're in some of those meetings that I was talking about. If you are in some of those meetings and you never want to hear about a maturity matrix or a terms of reference ever again, you're just about to scream, then stay in it. Stay there, because although they're frustrating, actually the power of us coming together is greater than the frustration. And I think it's just remembering we've come a long way. We need to keep looking at the big picture, celebrating those small shifts towards preventive and well-being work, because those relationships and those partnerships, I think, are going to be the key thing to change the dial on this. Thank you very much. Good.
There's no pressure on the next speakers to keep to time because that was amazing. And I think meetings, oh my God, meetings, they're appalling. Why do we still have them? I mean, I'm so totally serious. I was trying to talk to somebody in our parish council about getting a hedge cut, and he said, oh, we'll have to arrange a meeting about that. I do seriously think we could save a lot of money by rethinking how we do our business, because we don't build relationships in those formal meeting environments. They're not a comfortable place for most people, and people hold power in those meeting structures. So I think there's a plea to our statutory sector colleagues, who generally tend to be the ones that call the meetings, to really think, is this a meeting or is this a different conversation that we want to have? Because not everything has to be a meeting. So, without further ado, we're going to skip on to thinking about the relationship between community anchors and the local authority, and particularly around how they have been working together to address health inequalities, that thing that the NHS remembered existed during COVID, and many people have been talking about for very many years, and including Michael Marmot. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Julie Powell and Gavin Rogers, who are going to come up and talk about their power partnership in Brent, which isn't really a place, apparently. It's just a bit of London that's got other places in it. But as a northerner, I don't really understand that. So thank you so much.
You go first. Okay, fine. Hello, my name's Gavin Rogers, and I shouldn't be here really, because Nipa Shah, who's the Programme Director for Brent Health Matters, should be here, but she's not very well, unfortunately. And that's a shame for two reasons. One, she's better than me, but the other thing is people in our team don't look like me. They look like the people of Brent. So Brent is one of only 2 boroughs in the whole country where more people are born outside of Britain than inside. So when it comes to health inequalities, understanding diversity and inclusion is really not just important, but it's absolutely essential for somewhere like Brent. So as Olivia says, Brent is a borough in northwest London. Any football fans will know Wembley is in Brent, but we've also got Harlesden, Kensal Rise, where lots of celebs live and all that sort of stuff. But what we do have is we have an extremely diverse population. So we don't, one of the first things I understood when I came to Brent is we don't talk about BAME or BME populations, because they're not the minority, they're the majority. People who look like me are the minority. But the diversity of those populations, the diversity of those communities, meant that when COVID did hit, and coupling with the level of deprivation we have in some parts of the borough, we were hit really hard. In fact, 2 parts of Brent were the hardest hit in the whole country, had the highest cumulative death rates. One street in Brent, in the first wave of the pandemic, lost 43 people, died between the start of COVID and July, August, when we set up the Brent Health Matters programme. So lots of people talk about COVID being the catalyst for addressing health inequalities, and indeed that exactly was it for us in setting up Brent Health Matters. But it was much more than just, or we should really get round to that, as Olivia says. It was, we have to do this. People are dying. So we set up the Brent Health Matters programme, which was really, it was always envisaged as a freeway thing between the council, the NHS, and most importantly, the community. And from the very start, we've absolutely embedded it within the community. The reason I mentioned it was 2 parts of the borough rather than 2 wards of the borough is because we've always had an absolutely laser focus on it being hyper-local. So the areas that were affected, Church End in Harsden and Alberton, were very small areas, tiny sort of footprints. But that was reflective of the various different communities we have and where they cluster and how much they're affected by it. So Brent Health Matters was formed. We split our money between 3 different things. One was grants that went directly to community and voluntary organisations. One was to establish a team and to community champions, volunteers within the community from all the different parts, both geographically and from a diversity perspective. And then the other part was around our health educator programme, which Julie's going to talk to you about, which was about getting people who looked like, sounded like, were from the community to talk to people in the community about various aspects to do with their health and well-being. So the programme has been rolling now since, well, now it's coming to 3 years, I think it is. We've renewed the health educators. We've had 4 lots of grants I think we've given out. So we've given out over £1 million worth of money in grants. And our community champions have gone from strength to strength. So we've got about 50 who are sort of permanently in post and helping us with our work. And we've got about 400 community and voluntary organisations who we've had some sort of interaction with, some more than others. And in so doing, we've managed to be able to drill down into all sorts of communities. We've got the largest Indian community in the country. We've got the largest Brazilian community, largest Somalian community. We've done work in mosques, temples, community centres, all those sorts of things. But most importantly, we've done what people have told us that needs to be done. So we've absolutely got away as far as we can from that thing of saying, you need this, to saying, what do you need? And then building the events around it. So we hold events on a weekly basis, usually 2 or 3 a week. I think that's probably enough. I think you should tell people about the Health Educator Program.
Thank you. So it's been really interesting working in Brent. We work, so my name's Julie Powell, I work for CB+. We work in a number of boroughs around London, and we do national work. But what was really interesting about Brent was they really tried to anticipate what was happening with the communities. So one of the quiet stories that the borough doesn't share is actually they supported the local care homes right at the outset of the pandemic, made sure that high-quality PPE equipment was made available to staff, and actually had one of the lowest mortality rates in London boroughs. So they really tried to reach out to the community. So this piece of money came through, some COVID money from the Department of Health, I think, originally, and what they wanted to do was create a model called the Health Educators, which is really about trying to pull together what we would call a specialist provider alliance of 5 local charities who would skill up local people and actually deliver services across 5 areas of Brent. And the idea was that we would have the charities who are part of this alliance is ourselves, which is CB+, Brent Carers Centre, Brent Main Cap, Safi, which are a Somali organisation, and Plius, who do a lot of work around domestic violence. And we were given this money and asked to appoint effectively 2 full-time workers for each of these 5 areas in the borough. But what we decided to do was, rather than have full-time workers, we carved those jobs up so that we could actually recruit people locally, and they didn't have to compromise their benefits. So we would actually employ people for 10 hours a week, so they could still continue to not have their benefits compromised. But it also meant that they recognised some of the challenges that some of the local communities in Brent faced. From a governance point of view, we would have regular steering group meetings. We would actually be monitoring our performance, presenting, demonstrating how we performed against the key performance indicators. We were actually capturing service user outcomes and service satisfaction rates, and to ensure that there was consistency of approach, we made sure that all of the staff across were actually trained in operating standardized methods so that we were all working to the same services. And we employed a project manager who would actually be able to oversee the whole program. We collected evidence from case studies. And in the end, over 2 years, we've engaged with about 23,000 people. We've participated in about 1,000 community events. What we've actually been able to do is literally, to what residents have said to us, is by engaging with our health educators, they feel more confident about understanding long-term conditions like diabetes. They've actually taken positive changes to their behaviour, so they've adopted clean sleeping habits, dietary requirements. 15 of our health educators are now trained to do health checks, so it means that when people are going into community events, they're actually being they feel much more confident about undergoing these checks in a way that you don't want to do when you go to the doctors. What they've also really appreciated is the fact that they know more. They know more about themselves. They know how to look after themselves. They feel much they feel more confident about not having to rely on statutory health services. And I think that in itself has been a really important outcome. So, and the thing that I think we've really liked is the fact that residents have said, we like receiving support from the health educators. We really like the fact that you look and sound and experience like we do. So we're really, really pleased. So I think Brent Council should be congratulated for being quite brave in terms of going down this route, because we're a range of different sized community organisations, but they took a leap of faith. And for me, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to showcase what a power partnership could look like. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, both. And I think there's some really sort of themes emerging for me that are making me really think. I'm going to try and draw out in questions. But there is something about often the national, the big system thinks they can blueprint the answers, but actually the answers tend to be small and locally owned. So no matter how you design something nationally, prescribing it to be done this way locally simply doesn't work, because people is people and they'll do it their own way. We're going to move on now to think about the climate, and Bristol is really well known for taking action and really driving forward work around climate change. So I'm delighted to welcome Suzanne and Mark, who are going to talk to us about the work going on in Bristol through the Bristol Green Capital Partnership. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Mark Leach, work in the climate team at Bristol City Council, and I'm really excited to talk to this many people about potentially the most exciting, no, what am I saying potentially? Definitely the most exciting project we've got going on at the moment in my work. So yeah, I've got to tell you about the project, and then about some of the learnings from the project, and then hand on to Suzanne after that. So it's funded by the lottery, and it really starts to have a brilliant funding program that talks exactly the same language as you do, and the Lottery Climate Action Fund does exactly that. It's going on for 3 years. It takes action on climate, but also action on inequality, and it starts from where people are at. And it doesn't go in there and talk about climate. The first rule of climate engagement is you don't talk about climate, is it? And I love the tea and toast from Bernie O'Brien. She said, it's not early intervention, it's tea and toast. It's a bit like that with climate change. It's very similar. And we do that through co-production, so it's the 6 or now 12 community organisations leading, the partnership coordinating, and the council and Centre for Sustainability supporting that. And it's about community leadership, and it's about a number of different strands. So one is you've got these 6 community climate action plans. That's going to be the end of the result of this. And the other is you've got a panel of people who take a number of strategic, so we had the local plan, we've had transport decisions, we've had green space and resilience plans in front of a group of local people who then input. So that's where the community leadership panel come from. And then creativity is really important as well. So this is the plans. They've had these already. So they have created, communities have created climate action plans, which contain a range of things. But they all, as I say, start from local need, and they build on that local need. But they solve those local issues through climate action. So it's brilliant. But of course, plans are great. You also need action. We need to start delivering as well. I've already covered these organisations. So I've already talked about the first rule of climate engagement, but the other things are really about this kind of co-production. So it's a different way of working. It's kind of like, I'm going to talk about that in a future slide, actually. But the other one is about engaging and empowering diverse communities. And I think if you look at the 6 organisations, yeah, there are 2 communities of demographic communities, and there are 4 place-based communities. And that's a really good mix. And the next 6 are more of place, but the next 6 might be back to demographic communities. Right, okay, so what can councils do? One is obviously get money. We helped with the original lottery bid, helped delivering the plans. That's a lot of my work is around enabler, unlocking and unblocking. We can provide data and expertise. We can provide connections. We've got a strategic role because we're across the whole city as well. And I think the other thing is about community development approach. So I think that's been really, really valuable. I know that I've got community development colleagues here, and I think this kind of sums up part of it in a way. So moving from somewhere where we expect people to jump through a hole that isn't the right shape to kind of like actually changing the system as well through the project. So that's a bit about what the project is. So Suzanne actually asked me this question. She said, well, why do you do it, Mark? Why do you in the council want to be involved in this project? And I think one is that a lot of people in councils actually have the same drivers. We're just in a different kind of context. So our passions about improving place and working in a place-based way, they fit really well. This is where I go back to that original point about co-production. So people in councils will have been scarred by some of their experience working with communities. They'll have met someone who's belligerent or negative or will never. This is a completely different way of working. Because of the co-production, we sit down together and it's just all of that's gone and people engage in a really, really positive way. So that's really positive. We get much greater reach than we ever could as an organisation on our own by working with communities, and we get that informing into delivery and into service delivery and into policy. And the simple fact is, we've got these 2030 goals about being climate neutral. The council can't get there without communities, and that goes across the board, I think, not just for Bristol. More learnings. What should I pick out of here? I think a really, really cool one is about this empathy, and it comes down to co-production and the way of working. Once you start to think about how people in a different context to you work, I think that really helps. And the building of relationships over the 2 years, it's really helped in that as well. And it's really changed the way that kind of we work and we get stuff done. And then Locality asked me to talk about, they said one of the things they'd like to hear is about how embedded is this? So you've got these plans, you've got this delivery, but how embedded is it? How much is this context going to actually help deliver? And I rephrased that as, will these plans just sit on the shelf gathering dust? And I think I came up with a number of reasons why not, basically. And I think that's about buying at a political level, and the other things you can see there. I think one bit of evidence of that is that the people we've got in front of the panel, I think that's a real positive as well, and sort of proof. So in conclusion, follow a just transition approach. That's really essential. Communities are absolutely essential to change and mobilizing opinion. And these communities are all deprived or excluded or marginalized communities. They're not the usual, what the people are perceived to be the usual people in terms of climate action. Collaborative working is essential. And yes, this is an effective process, but it needs resourcing, and I know that's the challenge up and down the country. So I'm going to leave it there, rush the last one a bit because I got the 5-minute warning, so give Suzanne as much time as possible to talk.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, hello, I'm Suzanne Wilson. I run Lockleaze Neighbourhood Trust, which is a community organisation in North Bristol, and we talk about supporting residents to achieve positive change for themselves and their community. And, oh, there's a slide. Yes, green button. That's not me. Here we go. And just before I started on my 5 lessons, I wanted to say something about just transition, just because that can be a bit of a jargony word, but it's really important to our climate action approach. So all of us, individually and as communities, are being transitioned into something, and that's, you know, the prevailing culture of the day and the stories we believe and the people we hang out with. And in addition to wanting it to be a kind of greener, cleaner world, future, we also want it to be fairer than it is now. And so we want to make sure that the people who are least likely to have caused the climate emissions, least likely to have the capital or agency to protect themselves against climate impact, are the people who are leading and designing what comes next and how those solutions look like. And that's at the heart of what we do, and we're doing it hyper-locally in these either different communities of place or communities of interest. So I just came up with what I thought were 5 strangely numbered lessons on working with the council, but I hope that actually they will transfer to any kind of public sector, local authority partnership. And the first one I think is probably the key one, is work for relationships and not outcomes. So I briefly worked for Bristol City Council for just shy of 2 years. That was about as long as I could manage. And in that time, I was completely surprised and amazed by how many brilliant and talented people there were that worked there who shared my passions and struggled to get anything done in that environment. And I think it's finding those people and then, you know, dreaming dreams with them and trying to make stuff happen for the long term, because inevitably they are in that bureaucratic structure, which not only do they have to go up and down massive hierarchies, but they also have to try and laterally get colleagues to agree who often have no reason to work with them. And they love working with VCSE organisations because we can just do things. We can just go, oh yeah, that's a good idea, let's just try it. And we don't need to get like 50 people in the council and a politician and go through 3 weeks of committee to get it agreed. So it's sort of, yeah, find those people and then just build trust, which I think is what we have. So some things work, some things don't, but we're kind of in it together. Genuine co-production is powerful and attractive. I think what's really got people excited about what we're doing is there's really real stories about why shopping trolleys in South Bristol being dumped is not because people don't care about their community, but because they have low car ownership and no other way to get food. Like, telling those stories and then finding creative solutions to make stuff happen gets people really excited, because they move from high-level top-down theory to, oh, okay, this is practically why it's not working somewhere, and we've got a really engaged group of local people who are going to do something about that. So that's really exciting. And then sometimes community organisations, and I'm sure some of you are, if not all of you, are amongst them, can just do it on their own and be magnificent and get the big money and make change happen. But sometimes you're doing brilliant work, battling away on your own and coming up against a bit of a brick wall, and that's where gathering up with other community organisations can be really powerful. So, you know, it's not just Lockleaze Neighbourhood Trust saying we want to do really nice stuff around climate and environment. It's us and 5 other partners, and now there's another wave. So by the end of the project, there'll be 18 community partners, all with climate action, co-produced plans, and suddenly that's really interesting. Not just the council, lots of people want to speak to us. We've got this panel where we can put community insights into lots of different, both public sector and private sector things, and that's great. Collaboration is like crazy time-consuming and expensive, and I think we sometimes underestimate that. Bristol Green Capital Partnership, which obviously set up to make Bristol Green Capital in 2015, which they were very successful to do, but now is this kind of neutral CIC with over 1,000 members, and they were willing to take on the headache of managing a massive several £1 million lottery grant and 20 partners and all of the misery of the evaluation. And I think what we're doing is great, and I think community organisations increasingly need to sometimes work together so we can keep that hyper-local but also have that critical mass, and it means someone needs to stick their head up and go, I'll take the headache of the massive grant management. And then finally, beware the extractive. Community doesn't mean free. You probably all know this, but quite often people think, oh, I want to do something with the community. You're the community organisation. You could just... ... You could just help me do this, that, and the other. And the answer is, if it fits with our mission, and we think it's relevant and interesting to our residents, and you're going to pay us, then, yeah, maybe we will. But if it's none of those things, then actually, no thanks. And I think, yeah, I'll probably just leave it there. Do we stay, I think?
Okay, stay. No, we got it.
Stay. Yeah, there we go.
I couldn't interrupt that last point. It's so important. So I'd like to invite all our power partners to come back to the stage. There is loads of questions started to come in, but please do keep adding your questions and we'll endeavour to get to them. And I am going over here because I don't want to be Nigel No Friends on my own. Oh, so, we're missing somebody. No, we just got too many chairs. We get a whole different view of the room from this side. Can I just say, I'm really joyful about the number of people with fantastic coloured hair in the room. You don't get that in NHS conferences either.
I've got one thing.
Yeah, big shout out to the people who bring colour to people's lives. Thank you. And to their hairdressers. So there's quite a few themes actually, although they're very different.
Sorry, Neil's also.
Oh, you are coming.
I'm joined. Yeah, thank you.
Do you have a microphone on?
I don't have a microphone.
That's going to be awkward. Can we get a microphone for Neil? Is that possible? Can a really lovely AV person run down and then accost his head while we're talking? Can't see. I think they're going to come down.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to introduce? No, we'll wait till they can hear you, shall we? That's a better idea, isn't it? You introduce yourself. No, because they won't be able to hear you. We'll do it when we can hear you. So one of the things that really struck me, I think particularly in that last something Suzanne said, is about how do we unlock the potential of the staff in the statutory sector. So having spent 10 years in NHS England, it's a small wonder we ever did anything, because everything has to go through so many different approval processes, so many meetings. So we all understand about financial controls and the need to be extremely vigilant with public money, but that shouldn't be at the expense of actually getting anything done. And often I know from working in the community sector, just trying to find the people in the statutory sector because they're not very visible. And people are often afraid of doing the wrong thing. People are often a bit scared, oh, I'm not sure I can do that. Oh, I couldn't possibly email that director because I'm not a director. I would have to go through 3 levels before I can speak to that director. So I suppose I just want to address that to our statutory sector colleagues about what can we do to help unlock the brilliant people that work in your organisations who are often really hampered by that gradist bureaucratic culture. Shane, do you want to jump in?
More than happy. And I think it is important that you refer to NHS England, okay? I think that's the reason why ICBs are being created, to not have this central bureaucratic, as you describe, body, but to actually have a local set of organisations running health and social care. Is that working? Can people hear me okay, yeah?
Yep.
Okay. So that's the job of the Integrated Care Board. And also that's why we feel it's important we create 6 localities, because the localities then are the window into NHSE. Now, by the way, the ICB is so much more than NHS. It's local authority, it's a voluntary community. But I take the point. If there is some kind of untouchable thing somewhere over there that's called the NHS, and you can't find a way in, that's pointless. And that's why we have created integrated care boards. That's why we are creating and have created 6 localities, so that we have a local door into NHSE, which is the view of the integrated care board. I think the other thing is that we have to get decision-making as local as possible. So you take your point, if we have to go through 27 layers of something to get something done, then we've also failed. And that's why it's really important. And Neil will introduce himself in a minute, but that's why the likes of Neil, working with Charlie, working with other people at a local level, have to have the ability to make decisions. Now, there is no doubt NHS as a body has a cultural journey to go on, okay? That's not even not for question, okay? But that's part of creating the ICB. Can we take it on a cultural journey that actually says we understand what our communities need and we are here to help the communities deliver that rather than a top-down, bottom-up approach?
That's great. Gavin, I don't know if you want to come in about that. How do you invest in your staff to really release the power and potential of your staff?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 3 things of it really. The first is having a structure. So within Brent ICP, the Brent Health Matters programme, the Health Inequalities programme, if you like, is one of 4 parts. So the others are primary care, community care, and community services and mental health. So it's on that level. So you have that structure of that team that works with your community volunteers, your paid health educators, your voluntary sector organisations who we grant fund. So you have that structural level. Then within that, I think you then have a cultural kind of capacity within that health inequalities is up there. It's on that level, and that's where it needs to stay. One of the disappointing things in the wake of COVID is that lots of councils who recruited community champions at the time have now stopped recruiting them or stopped paying for them. Thankfully, we haven't, and we've actually all been made permanent members of staff as of in March we will be. But still, nevertheless, that's become part and parcel of it. So you've got the structure, you've got the culture, and then I think the third thing you need to have is you need to have the buy-in and that sort of direction of travel from everybody above. Because actually, whilst we're doing really great work with health educators and with our NHS partners and with the community and voluntary sector, the social determinants of health inequalities are not just about addressing diabetes and talking to particular demographics about conditions that affect them more than others. It's about housing, it's about benefits, it's about the cost of living crisis, it's about all of those other things that actually councils and government more broadly have a stake in. But how do you address housing? How do you address homes of multiple occupation? How do you address overcrowding, particularly in a London borough where housing is such a huge issue? And that's just one of many. So I think if you can have that sort of direction of travel permeate all the way up to the ICP directors and the chief executive of the council and everybody else, then hopefully you can start to go into those areas and to start to advocate for change that will have an effect on those levels as well as the sort of the health level, you know.
Thank you so much, Gavin. And then I'm going to come back to you, Mark, as well, because Suzanne made that comment. I just wonder, in a Bristol context, unlocking the power of your staff and the potential there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back to, there's a community centre in Bristol, not a million miles from here, and they wanted to get solar panels on their roof. And they were having real block when they were dealing with people in, I guess, property and legal in the council. And they got in touch with me, and as a sort of intermediary, I think that I didn't do anything special. Just 2 simple things. Really understood where the community were coming from. That this community needed these panels to generate income. But also, I really understood that the people in legal and property weren't getting out of bed every day to block the community. They were getting to protect our assets. They saw that community centre as owned by everyone in Bristol, and they wanted to protect it. And as soon as you kind of understand that, and you work with it, and you go, okay, right, I get that. Yeah, if there's a genuine block here, then we'll, as soon as you understand that and treat that with a bit of respect, then actually we've got a breakthrough. There are now those community solar panels on the community centre. So I think there's something about understanding and brokering and like bringing people together, people in the same room, and actually seeing each other's point of view. I know it sounds a bit fluffy, but there's hard evidence that it works. So,
Thank you so much. Neil, introduce yourself to us. Now you've got a microphone in your hand.
I have. Can people hear me? Okay, hi everyone. I'm Neil Turney. I work in the Locality Partnership for Bristol North and West, working alongside Charlie. Very nice to be here.
Cool, thank you very much. There's quite a few questions on there that kind of almost trump my first question that I was going to ask, so I'm going to ask mine anyway. So I think, so has everybody read Locality's manifesto that was published today? What do you mean, no? You've had a lunch break. It's not that long a read. Good. It's brilliant. Really do go and read it, because it is a genuine and really powerful call for change. And one of those things is about collaboration and actually shifting the procurement systems in the public sector to more collaborative commissioning arrangements. But that opens up all sorts of questions for me about culture, because we've got procurement people, finance people, legal people, all these backroom people who have been trained to the nth degree over very many years to run very bureaucratic procurement processes that are highly competitive, highly costly for social enterprises, community organisations who want to try and tender. There was some work done a while ago that it was something like the average cost of tendering for a public sector contract was about £28,000 for small organisations. It's just not viable, so most people don't bother. If we're genuinely going to shift to collaborative commissioning, and the NHS should already be on that track, because this duty to collaborate, the collaborative commissioning approach, was introduced in the last set of NHS changes that created integrated care boards. What can we do to support those who work in the system to genuinely understand and embrace and build their skills around collaborative commissioning? Because it's very different to running a procurement process. So anybody want to pick that up, as everybody is avoiding eye contact with me? Shame.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to pick it up. I think, as I said previously, I think the shift of culture, such like the NHS culture, isn't something you can do overnight, but you can start to shift it, and that's what we're trying to do. So first of all, having moved across here 18 months ago, I was quite surprised, having left Northern Ireland, how competitive the NHS is and how much procurement is really important, okay? So that surprised me slightly, coming from a Northern Ireland background where it's not as competitive and actually procurement doesn't seem as important. So there's something I found a little bit alien, okay? I think what's important is that we need to use our localities as the heart of understanding our communities. And I don't believe I will get to a place where we can let the reins loose on procurement until we build real trust in both the data and the people around our localities. And that's part of building a partnership. A partnership for me is based on, do we trust each other and do we need each other? And if we can build really strong localities where we trust each other and we need each other, then actually the need for what you might call procurement and contracts actually becomes lower, because you're building a shared need, a shared understanding. So that's the journey we're going to try and go on. This is quite interesting. I've talked in my own organization about commissioning is dead. Okay, so if we think from that space, it needs to be developing services in partnership. Doesn't happen overnight, but that's where I'd like to go. And that's part of the reason why localities are so important to understand the need. Localities are so important to build the partnerships. And then we have to change the way we buy stuff. I mean, that's as simple as it gets. But that's part of the thing that sits on my shoulders. That's what I have to do. I have to change the way the NHS buys stuff. Mm-hmm. Because if it carries on buying it the way we used to buy it, I don't know whether it's £28,000, £10,000, but there is a cost to being a person at the other end of that, and we have to change that. So that's a commitment that we have to do. And I'm hoping the locality movement that we're generating can help to shift some of that. We're really at the foothills. I mean, I'm not sitting here today saying we've cracked this, But that's why ICBs have been created, to get us away from the place that we found ourselves in.
Thanks, Shane. Julie, do you want to jump in?
So, as somebody, my organisation has participated in a number of public sector procurement exercises, some successfully, some less so. And I think there are a few things that I think we need to just be really clear about. I think far too much power is given to procurement and the procurement process, and it doesn't need to be. I think the interpretation of procurement obligations is taken to a degree that is actually about disempowering local community organisations. The introduction of a weighted evaluation formula really does go against the needs of local community organisations, and I think actually penalises smaller organisations. So for those of you who are not familiar, quite often what's happened is that statutory authorities will say, well, we're really great because our evaluation method is 70% or 60% quality, 30% price, and 10% social value. And that sounds great on paper, but actually what it means when they do the ratio calculations is they'll do a weighting. So whoever offers the lowest price will then get the full 30%, for example, and then the quality price then can be it can be brought down. So I think what often happens is that even though a commission authority will say, we're actually commissioning for quality, actually it is price that is the deciding factor. So I think that is part of the reality around what procurement looks like from the voluntary and community sector. And I think that's really something that needs to be addressed. I think there's also something about the way that social value is interpreted, because, some of the contracts that we've been invited to tender, what we're being asked is, can you actually provide some apprenticeships? But if you're doing an advocacy contract, for example, you're not going to employ apprentices to deliver advocacy work as part of their career journey, because that places both them and the recipient of the service at risk. So there is just sometimes I think it's about taking a breath, standing back and thinking, what are we actually trying to do? What are we trying to change? Whose lives are we actually trying to improve? I think that's really, really important.
Thank you. Jump in.
Yeah, if I could just give a perspective, I suppose, from the side of Locality Partnership, what Shane was saying, what that means to us is that we're setting up a series of values which reflect the locality, so what's important to local people, the local organisations that work there, and then being able to devolve that decision-making, so taking sort of pots of money or areas of where decisions are made, bringing data into the locality so we can work as a group of people to then decide as a locality, which I work for but don't lead that locality, about what is the right course of action for us. So it's sort of thinking about what will have the biggest impact with the resources that we've got and being able to make that decision as a group. So it does involve a lot of working on governance and devolving that, but being a link person or a conduit back to the NHS to help, I suppose, oil the wheels or to help get things done on the inside of what is quite a complex, I used to not work for the NHS, so I can say this, quite a complex place to work.
That leads me beautifully into the other side of the equation. So just thinking about the work that needs to happen within ICBs, within local governments and so on around different mindset, different shift. What can the community sector, the voluntary sector, offer into that if we think about co-produced procurement processes, co-produced plans that are then delivered at locality level? And we'll come on to the size of locality in a minute. I'm very aware there's a question about that. I don't know if any of our community power partners want to sort of pick into that about what you have to offer into those bits of the unseen bits of the system, the procurement people, the contracting people, about them understanding how community organisations work and function.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think, as actually, for this to genuinely work, you need some dedicated community social enterprise procurement people, and that actually is something that local authorities, NHS, they just need to start developing that within their procurement teams. But I also think there's something about how the community sector works, and we I've been talking about this in the North locality because I'm in the little gang with Charlie, and we as individual community organisations can be sort of radically independent in what our version of tea and toast looks like, which, is all a variation on a theme, but we all call it something slightly different, and that often makes the NHS feel quite nervous because they want to have a kind of uniform price for a uniform outcome. And there's a piece of work that we need to do as community organisations to say, how can we describe some of these things in a way that gives the NHS the uniform need that it needs, but also allows us to deliver something in a way that really respects what's going on in that hyperlocality. And how can we work together so that, for example, we can bid for something across the north with a range of different hyperlocal partners and not just have, one partner to rule them all. And some of that is about timing and the procurement process allowing us that time. But some of it also is about, we know these things are coming up. We need to kind of pull our finger out and talk to each other and do that piece of groundwork so that we can say, actually, we're really ready now for these bids to come out and us to have a collaborative bid. And we're not there yet, but I think we're just starting to understand what some of those jigsaw pieces are.
Thanks, Suzanne. Anybody else want to jump in there? I'm going to lead it into another question that's in here. Not hugely upvoted, but it should be. There's something about data, about how do we make informed decisions, and a heavy reliance in population health management in particular on data. And yet we know the data is really poor. We know that routinely we don't collect the data about people's ethnicity. We're getting better, but it's still not there. We don't routinely, even though it's a legal requirement, collect the data about whether somebody is homeless and what being homeless means. There's a lot of data that isn't there, and yet an increasing reliance on data-driven decision-making. So there's a question in my mind about how do we work with communities to contextualise the data we do have? Because often you'll get a group of GPs in a room, you'll share the data about their practice population, and they go, that ain't our practice, because it bears no relation to the people that they know that they care for. What can we do with that, and how can we help the statutory system use the more grey data, the more soft data, and the stories in a harder way? I'm getting some nods, so I'm not totally mad. Charlie, jump in.
Yeah, I mean, like Shane and Neil have been saying, we're really at the start of this journey, so we've not got a kind of like a great answer case study for you right now, but what we understand is, I mean, for us as a voluntary sector, having access even to that data is amazing. Mm-hmm. So, just kind of seeing that across a population level is amazing. But what we've also done is we've set up, so we've called it the Community Insights Group in North and West. So the idea is that you've got the kind of hard data, but then you've got the community intelligence, and what we're trying to do is just is frame that and kind of have a structure around that so that we can feed that back in the best way. Because I guess what like you say, it's the stories that we hear that then are, it's almost like that Venn diagram and the sweet spot. So if we can have the Venn diagram has 3, doesn't it? And I can only think of the 2. But it's that community insight coming in, and so we're looking forward. Next convention we'll let you know how it goes. But that's our plan.
Brilliant, thank you. How about the experience in Brent and that use of data?
I mean, I think data is really important to be able to contextualise it. But I think being able to listen to the communities about the issues that they've got, and then to use that context later on. So, I mean, I think thinking about the Somali community in particular we worked with, where our local mental health trust were very concerned that the data was showing there weren't any referrals into their services. And essentially, when we were able to gather together 9 Somali community organisations, create a forum for them, give them a space to talk about it, have an event which had Somali-speaking clinicians at it, the term mental health was really anathema to them. It wasn't something that they were able to, it was a stigma. So we could change the language and talk about emotional support and talk about people feeling depressed or lonely or socially isolated, and how we could bridge those gaps by dealing with some of the elders in the community to create networks where people were supported. But that was a long way from the term mental health, which really jarred with that community. And it took us a lot of work to be able to then get those conversations going, and to also have those conversations separately amongst men and women, so that again there weren't sort of cultural issues that impinged on those conversations being free and open. So I think sometimes your data can sort of point to an issue, but unless you really get sort of down and dirty with that community in terms of what's behind it, it's just the sort of canary in the coal mine, really. So that's probably how we use it more, I think, in Brent.
Thanks, Julie.
So I think what's been really interesting about Brent is they saw the data and decided to do something about it and worked with local communities. And I think that's what we need more exemplification of, is that how we use data to be able to drive forward service change and service improvement, and hopefully a bit of co-production and co-delivery. But I think one of the reasons why data has become such a difficult area is because there isn't consistency. And I think as a result of it, in some places, it isn't used to inform decision-making or to inform resource allocation. And in some places it is. And I think there is something about rebuilding a bit of confidence in the integrity of the data. And I think we've allowed ourselves in some places to get slightly sidetracked around things like personal data and things like that in terms of data cleanse and information sharing protocols. And I think what's happened is there are some places that are more confident in their community insights function than in others. And I think that's one of the things we just probably need to improve a little bit better.
Thanks, Julie. Shane, you're twitching. Do you want to jump in?
I'm twitching.
Yeah, I noticed a twitch.
No. I think what's interesting is we have invested really heavily in a single data environment. BNSSG, we have all GPs on one system with a single care record and all this kind of stuff. But we still don't have the insight until you bring that data out and then get people to say, so what's it telling us? Mm-hmm. So we've got data quality teams that go back in and make sure ethnicity is on the system or the postcode's on the system. So we do all that. But it is useless until you interact with human beings. And that's the key. Can we take that data and actually bring it into the right place, to have the right conversations with the right people to move forward? And I think you've got to have, as you say, you've got to have both. You've got to have the data, and that's great, a lot of effort into that. But until you bring it to people, it simply is empty, and that's the exciting bit. And then you get insight and intelligence rather than data when you can bring it to the right people. And that's for us, I think, the challenge now is, are we getting it to the right table, and is there the right people around that table?
Thanks, Shane. So I'm going to address this to each of our power partnerships, but one of the questions in the app, and keep them coming, guys, they're good questions, is about advice. So what advice would you give to community organisations who want to build a relationship, a partnership with their statutory sector partner or partners, be that the ICB, be that the council? What advice would you give, both from your position as a community anchor or your position as a statutory sector partner?
Should I go?
Go for it.
I mean, obviously, I just gave you like 5 advice things, but I can give you more. I think, firstly, it's kind of be super specific, because I think if there's a real need or there's a funding call or something, that just gives you a really clear ask, and that's quite helpful. And then Certainly, my point about the work for relationships and not outcomes, and I'm telling this to myself, don't lose your temper. So I think quite often, I mean, not so much about climate, but we have got a community-led housing project, and the number of times I've heard no, like, you know, you could sort of plaster the house with, and it's just keeping on and not burning bridges when people seem to be like crazily bureaucratic, and just probably that's ask my other lovely members of staff to talk to them. But yeah, just keeping on, and you'll kind of get there eventually, I think. And it's just being super clear about what you want or what the opportunity is, and then just keep walking in the same direction.
Thanks, Suzanne. Mark?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is really handy is if you can think of a precedent. If you're trying to do something different, for example, or persuade the people you're working with, your partners, local government, whatever, to do something different, then I think precedent is really, really important. And I've seen that being used very effectively by some of the communities we're working with. And you know, it might be somewhere else in the country, but an example, someone's going to do something a bit risky, a bit innovative. I mean, it's a contradiction, isn't it? Because everyone wants to do something innovative, but you also want to know there's a safe example of where it's worked. But yeah, I think if you can find a precedent, that's really good. Again, like Suzanne, I've already given some advice about empathy, understanding, all that sort of stuff. But I think that's another one that I've seen used really effectively is finding a precedent.
Thanks so much. And moving on to Brent.
I think someone sort of talked about it earlier on about sort of bringing something to the party and being able to sort of help the authority understand what they're missing. I mean, talking about data, you also got to think about the data that you haven't got, the stuff that you don't know, the sort of, you know, for those old enough, the Donald Rumsfeld unknowns kind of thing. We had a particular community in our borough, the Brazilian community, who lots of them were sort of off the books because their immigration status perhaps wasn't what it should be. And so when COVID came along, we were trying to give them their vaccine, and they weren't coming forward because they thought they would get reported and all the rest of it. And so we did a really big piece of work about how registering with your GP, you don't need to give your address, you don't need to have any ID, you're not going to be reported to the Home Office or anything like that. And in so doing, we're able to build up that sort of trust within them, so that not only can we give them their vaccine, but we can then see them for all the other medical conditions that they might have, and just know that they're there, know that we've got that community. So, you know, working with a community organisation that had a particular way into that community, getting them to tell us what their intelligence was, that these people were there, but they were sort of hidden in plain sight, and then finding a way to work with them where we built the trust and were able to show them that it wouldn't lead to the outcome that they were fearing, allowed us to get there. So I think if you bring something and the authority is open to that, and I appreciate maybe not everyone is, but certainly we were, then I think that you can, you know, you're selling something that they want to buy, and I think that's always, sorry, got a bit capitalist there, but anyway, that works. So.
Thanks, Gavin. Julie?
So the thing about people who work in public services really want to deliver public goods, and I think sometimes we can forget that, and it's really important that's what you have to remember when you go into a conversation. So when I go into a conversation with a statutory partner, it is about remembering that we're all trying to work together for the good of our local residents and for the good of our local communities. And when you start that conversation from that premise, then actually what you start to understand is what are the barriers that will prevent you from working together, and what can you do together to try and make things happen. And I think that's really, really important. And because most people who work in public sector, as well as the community sector, are values-driven individuals, I think it's really important we should remember that.
Absolutely brilliant point. Thank you, Julie. Shane?
Thank you. Not wanting to repeat Julie's point, because actually that was where I was going. It is so important that we spend time to understand each other in the relationship rather than come to the relationship with assumptions. And I think everyone does make assumptions when they come to the relationship, because I've had the pleasure of working in public service for 27 years. I've yet to meet someone who works in public service who doesn't want to do the right thing for the public. And I have no doubt that's the same in everybody in this room. So we actually do have the same North Star We have the same place we're pointing. But do we spend enough time to understand the place we find ourselves in? And I think before we start saying we do X, we do Y, actually, let's spend some time understanding each other as opposed to saying, well, the answer has to be this. So it's about finding the space and time to have understanding.
Wise words. Charlie.
I feel like I'm repeating what people have said, but just an example. So going back about 4 years ago, and it was actually Locality that helped kind of convene a conversation with adult social care around how we could do care differently in the city. And a load of us came together and started to have those conversations. And I think having that space to dream together and everything that Shane and others have been saying about chance to build those relationships, there's been a lot that have come out of those conversations. So the latest one is a project around hospital discharge that is trying to support people to kind of return home well. And that's a mixture of loads of across adult social care and community health and voluntary sector. But that project, I think, probably wouldn't be where it is now. It wouldn't have started if it wasn't for those initial conversations and relationships that were built way back then. So I guess it's like, how do you create some of those spaces, and maybe who do you need to bring in that might be able to support, to broker some of those conversations to create that relationship and trust.
Thank you. Neil?
Yeah, mine are really simple. So I think don't assume that statutory partners know as much about something as you do. You know it from the ground up, whether it's a sort of service or a community-based level. And that is quite different from what people know reading service specifications or delivering contracts. So don't be afraid to let that expertise come through. And then I think when organisations work together and then approach statutory agencies, that's really powerful. If you've got like 2 or 3 people saying you all know each other, you all know the sort of problems and areas you're trying to address, and coming with a solution or an idea as a collective is really powerful than having one conversation and then going off and have another conversation with somebody else. So thinking about how you can communicate before you start the conversation, because I think that does give it a lot more weight.
Thanks, and that links back to something Suzanne was saying about how do you collaborate within the sector in order to have a single conversation with your statutory sector partners to have greater impact and greater effect. There's also a question in the questions about the proliferation of new community, in inverted commas, or voluntary organisations that appear to be popping up, often established by people like me maybe who've just left the NHS or stepped out of statutory sector and gone, aha, I want to do something on this, I'm going to set up a group, without necessarily looking at what's already there. I don't know if people have an experience of that, or I suppose advice about how do you embrace some of the new players if they're seen as a threat or they're not necessarily playing in the same game as you.
Should I say something?
Yeah, go on.
I think that obviously, someone this morning said actually it's about knowing what you're really good at and who you need to work with when there are gaps. And you just literally, there's so much need that you can't do it all yourself. And you wouldn't want to, because it would be really homogenous and not as diverse and interesting. And so it's kind of just being really clear, like, actually, this is the bit that we do and we do really well. And we want to like hold on to that and grow that and protect that. And if other people pop up in the same place doing the same thing, potentially that cannibalizes what we do, because there just either aren't enough service users or volunteers or people to sustain that, and having really adult conversations about it. Equally, where we support people, particularly the kind of social enterprise lone ranger who's come up with a brilliant idea, and we do, it's kind of going, actually it'd be great if you could mention Lockleaze Neighbourhood Trust when you say about all your impact that it was done slightly by us giving you a bit of a leg up. And so it's trying to sort of develop a bit of a culture around, yeah, we've got a really great network and we love to help each other, but let's make it a two-way street and not just we give and you take, because that doesn't really work, and that just hollows us out. So yeah, for us, it's about just trying to be really clear, this is what we do really well, and we want to own that space, we want to work with lots of people and we want to help them because, as lots of people have said, we're all working for the same things, but it's got to be a bit of reciprocity. And when there isn't, we're going to call you out.
So there is very definitely something in that, isn't there, about the power of the collaboration within the sector, but then the power of the collaboration of everybody, including private sector and independent organisations, in partnership, because everybody's after doing the same thing. So don't see the profit motive necessarily as being a barrier. I want to move us on slightly because I'm aware we don't have much time left. We have 10 minutes left. I'm on time. To think about prevention. So we all know tackling health inequalities would be better done by preventing it. We know climate change, it would be better if we prevented the damage in the first place. And yet none of us really no sector seems to be able to get on the front foot of we're all trying to solve the problems we've caused, as opposed to unlearning and redoing a preventative approach that stops it happening in the first place. Money's key to that, because money tends to flow. We know in the NHS it flows into secondary care in spades because there is a massive need to treat people. They're already ill. How do we unlock some of the resources to think genuinely about prevention? Because you're all thinking about this. Mark's going to jump in.
Well, I do think, so I don't know whether we use the word co-benefits enough, but like the Community Climate Action Project is built on co-benefits. One of the reasons it is a bit of jargon, really, isn't it? But I think looking at where climate and health, where the intersection, so active travel is a huge one. And if we can get more people walking, using the bus is sometimes counted as active travel because you usually have to walk to somewhere either side. And I think perhaps that's the approach that CCA has taken, is very much to look at that sort of joined up, holistic way, and that can save resources. So yeah, I think that's one way of doing it.
Thank you. Shane was leaning forward, but Gavin jumped.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I mean, the experience that struck me most in Brent around prevention was around organ donation. Because it affects some of the communities we have much more than the indigenous population, if you like. So if you're from a Southeast Asian background or from a Black African or Caribbean background, it's your likelihood to get a match for organ donation is a lot less because there's a lot fewer donors. We worked with an organisation called JHOD, which is the Jain and Hindu Organ Donation, and they have over the last decade actually, so before we even got involved, but we've done an event with them and all sorts of other stuff, a film too. They have worked in the temples and around the Jain and Hindu population consistently to talk about how the only way that we're going to be able to help our community get the organs that they need is to make sure that people from our community are given the organs when they die. And I'd made a film with people from Northwick Park who do transplants, and the surgeon spoke at one of our events, and he said, 10 years ago, if I'd have gone into the room to ask a family from a Hindu background whether they would donate their father or mother's organs after they died, I would expect them to say no. Now I expect them to say yes, because that's how the dial has moved, that's how the community has come along, that's how things have changed, and the whole perception of it, and the understanding, the buy-in from the temples and the religious leaders talking about how it's an act of dan and charity, and it's not only okay to do it, but it's actually in keeping with your religious beliefs to do that. So I think that's the sort of thing that I think where prevention really, really works. Again, when it comes bottom up from the community, when there's a real sort of sense of why it affects you specifically as a Southeast Asian Hindu, as opposed to why it's a good thing to do, or why you might want to get fitter or eat less or whatever it might be. Because I think we all know those things, but if you can absolutely personalise it to the individual, then it just has so much more impact.
Thank you, Shane.
Yeah, I suppose from a strategic perspective, a couple of things. Every system, but I'm referring to Bristol, North Somerset, and South Gloss, had to produce a clear strategy for the next 5 years. Where do we want to take health and social care to? The body that drives that is what's called the Integrated Care Partnership, and the Integrated Care Partnership is made up by the voluntary and community sector, the chairs of many of the statutory organisations, and a range of other people. That strategy was produced signed off just before Christmas last year and put into action sort of March, April time. Every single member of the Integrated Care Partnership has signed up to that strategy, and that strategy is absolutely embedded in prevention, okay? So I don't think I could ever get the system to move unless the people at the very top of the system said, this is what we're going to do. So that's happened, which is great. That doesn't make it happen, doesn't make it work, but without it, I'm absolutely stuffed, okay? So at least the Integrated Care Partnership has signed up and said, this is what's really important. What we now have to do is take that strategy and through the localities, make it real. But without them signing off on it, we were bust. The other side then we started to do is start to prove that prevention is better to the purse, okay? Because you know that people in government listen to the money, okay? They should listen to much more than that, but they listen to the money. So if we had a system can prove prevention is better for the purse, then actually you can start to make some changes. And we're working with universities, Bath University in particular, to demonstrate that prevention actually saves money. And that gets to a certain group of individuals who will go, oh, all right, then I'll happily invest in it. So we've got the localities, we've got the strategy, and then we're trying to prove, and we all know in our heart of hearts, of course it saves money, but can you prove it? And that's what we're trying to do with academics at the moment, so that there isn't anyone who wouldn't agree the best thing we can do is invest in prevention.
Great, thanks Shane. Neil?
Yeah, and it does work, because when you have people around the table who are local, I know that Charlie will pull us up and say, what are we doing about children and young people in North and West? So there's a natural incentive to say, we need to stop the people that we're here to support becoming unwell, and we need to help them to get better. Is there anything you want?
No, yeah, I agree with that. I think we're on a journey with it, aren't we? You know, and I think the conversations are fantastic, but also we're some way from where we want to be, and I think that Shane, you've articulated that as well. I think there are some challenges, like we've had some history. So in terms of a particular example, I guess is around a 3% commitment to the voluntary sector in one of the health contracts, which hasn't quite kind of come, and I guess it's kind of, I think some of those things, like we need to also see some of that change, and I think we believe in the partnership, we believe in working together, and I think if we start to see some of that change and that shift, then it, I think the trust as well will come through that as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and trust, I think we touched on this earlier about learning to trust. I think, Shane, you mentioned it, learning to trust each other. There is just something about spending time together, isn't there? Not in a meeting, not with an agenda, but time to really understand one another and understand the benefits of what you all bring to the party. And I just wonder, how do you carve that time out? We've only got a few minutes left. How do you prioritise carving time out to build relationships? And what would your advice be to people here who can't get people to answer their emails, let alone spend time having a cup of coffee, getting to know one another?
I'm happy to sort of...
Brave man.
Because I've come in for Nipa, who's the program director, I'm the communications and engagement manager. So one of the things that I do is I try and build situations where I can draw some of those people into the same room. So we host we got a local radio station in Brent, and every month they host a health hour. And so every month I'll get together a clinician, a service user, a director from the ICP, or whoever it might be, a person from the voluntary sector, and we'll talk about diabetes, or we'll talk about cancer screenings or, any number of different things. And we've been doing it for a couple of years. And in that way, you kind of make networks, you introduce people to each other, you get people talking on common purpose, and you also have those same sort of debates that we're talking about here over the airway. Where can you go, who's in the community, what do the statutory partners do, what was your experience as a service user, etc. and so forth. So I think things like that can help. Obviously sort of social events and all that sort of thing can help too, but sometimes it's just about getting everybody in the same room talking about a specific issue. And engagement events, communications opportunities can sometimes help you do that, because not only do you speak to each other, but you speak to the residents, which is obviously the most important thing.
Neil?
Yeah, I would say that there's a tendency to think that you'll do the work and then the relationship will come, but actually the relationship comes first and then the work will come afterwards. So I think try not to lose sight of that and recognise that building the relationship is the work, and it is difficult, but that probably is the first step, and that is the first stage, in my experience.
Thank you. And Shane's nodding, but Suzanne?
I was going to say a quick thing. Obviously, there is lots of nice, let's do well-being check-ins and learn personal stories. But there's also some really fundamental things, which is don't commission things and then take them back in-house the next year and TP over all the staff and take all of that IP, Or don't say, we're going to give you some money and then never increase it with inflation. It's also about, just being a good partner and putting some structural things in place which says, I really respect what you do. Yeah, I'm running this massive organisation, which is ridiculous and been around for 100 years. But you're running, even if it's smaller, an equally valuable and important service, and I'm going to treat you with dignity and respect and work for the long term, not just a really short commissioning cycle. And so I think, yes, let's talk about treating people as people in the room, but also when we're commissioning and when we're doing those things, still trying to preserve that relationship.
And do what you say you're going to do. Shane?
No, I think picking up on that point, the issue of commissioning and having long-term investment is, for me, how you build a trusting relationship. So I know that the NHS has too often had little pockets of money and just drops it in and then walks away. So what we're trying very hard, and we have managed to do in BNSSG for next year, is secure recurrent money. And that will allow us to then, through our localities, get into proper conversations around what does it look like this year, next year, and onwards. I think that's probably the first time that's been done, but we've managed to secure proper amounts of recurrent monies that we can distribute through our localities. Because it's not a relationship. If it's simply dropping some stuff in, it's a hierarchy. It's the NHS going, well, you take that bit, as opposed to a genuine long-term relationship.
Cool. And long-term relationships are based on trust, as every successful marriage, I don't have one of those, but every successful marriage understands that it's built on compromise, it's built on trust. We are out of time. I've got to a fraction of the questions that came in, but I hope you will agree with me and give thanks to all our power partners for being really honest. And I think we said warts and all. I think they've delivered warts and all in a really honest way, and I think you need to hold Charlie and Shane to their word and bring them back in a year or two to see how it's going, because hopefully, a couple of years, we will start to see the fruits of change. Thank you all very much for your patience. I'm going to hand you back over to Tony.